behind the golden gates of Avalonia's Grand Palace, where centuries of tradition meet modern scrutiny, a single visit would shatter the carefully maintained facade of royal perfection. In a world where every gesture is watched, every tear analyzed, and every silence speaks volumes, Princess Catherine had learned to hide her pain behind practiced smiles and elegant waves. But on this particular autumn morning, as foreign dignitaries gathered in the marble halls and cameras waited beyond the palace walls, an unexpected visitor would arrive carrying secrets that would test the very foundations of the monarchy itself. King Alexander had ruled with steady hands for 3 decades, weathering political storms and family scandals with the stoic dignity expected of his crown. Yet nothing had prepared him for the moment when his daughter-in-law's composure would finally crack, when tears would flow freely in corridors that had witnessed centuries of royal sorrows, and when his own silence would become both shield and burden. The visitor who came that day carried more than just documents and memories. They brought the power to either heal old wounds or tear them open beyond repair. This is the story of 5 days that changed everything, where royal duty collided with human emotion, where the weight of crowns proved no match for the weight of truth, and where a kingdom watched as its beloved princess faced the greatest trial of her life. In the grand theater of monarchy, some performances are scripted, some are improvised, and some are heartbreakingly, devastatingly real. The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of Rosehaven Palace like whispered secrets refusing to fade. Princess Catherine Alexandra Victoria stood at the tall windows of the blue drawing room. Her fingers traced the intricate patterns carved into the mahogany frame as she watched the groundskeepers tend to the rose gardens below. The October air held that particular crispness that reminded her of her childhood, when autumn meant long rides through the estate's sprawling countryside, and evenings spent by the fireplace with books that transported her far from the gilded cage of royal expectations. Today felt different, though she couldn't quite place why. Perhaps it was the unusual tension she had sensed in King Alexander during their morning briefing, or the way her private secretary, Margaret Thornfield, had stammered through the day's schedule with uncharacteristic nervousness. Catherine had learned, through 15 years of royal marriage, to read the subtle signs that preceded palace storms. The staff moved with that particular efficiency that masked anxiety, their footsteps echoing just a fraction too quickly through the marble corridors. The royal household was preparing for the annual diplomatic reception, a grand affair that would host ambassadors and dignitaries from 37 nations. Catherine had participated in dozens of such events, each one a carefully choreographed dance of protocol and diplomacy. She knew which ambassador preferred to discuss art rather than politics, which dignitary's wife collected vintage jewelry, and exactly how long to spend with each delegation to ensure no one felt slighted. These skills had been drilled into her since her engagement to Prince William 15 years ago, back when she was simply Catherine Pemberton, a young woman whose greatest concern was whether her literature dissertation would be accepted by the university board. Her reflection was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Margaret entered, her usually pristine appearance slightly disheveled. At 62, Margaret had served the royal family for over 4 decades, beginning as a junior secretary and rising through the ranks to become Catherine's most trusted advisor. Her gray hair was always perfectly arranged, her navy suits impeccably tailored, and her manner unflappingly composed. Today, however, Catherine noticed that Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her leather portfolio. "Your Royal Highness," Margaret began, her voice carrying an unusual tremor. "There's been an unexpected development regarding today's schedule." Catherine turned from the window, her sapphire blue dress rustling softly against the Persian rug. The dress had been chosen specifically for today's events, its color complementing the historic sapphire brooch that had belonged to Queen Isabella, William's great-great-grandmother. Every detail of her appearance had been planned weeks in advance, from the pearl earrings that would catch the light during photographs to the subtle shade of lipstick that would appear elegant, but not ostentatious in the official portraits. "What kind of development, Margaret?" Catherine asked, moving to her writing desk where the morning's correspondence waited in neat piles. The desk itself was a masterpiece of 18th-century craftsmanship, its surface polished to mirror brightness and adorned with silver-framed photographs of royal family members throughout the generations. Margaret hesitated, a pause that sent a chill through Catherine despite the warmth radiating from the ornate fireplace. In all their years together, Margaret had never hesitated to deliver news, whether it concerned scheduling conflicts, media controversies, or family disagreements. She was known throughout the palace for her directness, her ability to present even the most delicate situations with clarity and tact. "There's a visitor requesting an audience with you, Your Royal Highness. They arrived this morning without appointment, but they claim to have information of significant importance regarding your family history." The words hung in the air like smoke from the fireplace, curling around Catherine's consciousness within weight she couldn't immediately comprehend. Family history was a subject approached with extreme caution within royal circles. The official genealogies were meticulously documented, every branch of the family tree examined and verified by historians and genealogists. Unofficial family history, however, was far more dangerous territory, filled with secrets that could destabilize not just personal relationships, but entire institutions. Catherine's own family history had been thoroughly investigated before her marriage to Prince William. The Pemberton family lineage was respectable but not noble, tracing back to successful merchants and minor landowners in the northern counties. Her father, James Pemberton, had built a modest fortune in textile manufacturing, while her mother, Eleanor, had devoted herself to charitable causes and community organizations. There had been no scandals, no hidden secrets that would embarrass the crown or provide ammunition for Republican movements that sought to diminish the monarchy's influence. "What kind of information?" Catherine asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. She had learned that when people arrived at palace gates claiming to possess important information, they usually carried either blackmail schemes or revelations that would prove painful to all involved. Margaret opened her portfolio and withdrew a cream-colored envelope bearing an official seal that Catherine didn't immediately recognize. The paper was of high quality, the kind used for formal correspondence between institutions of significance. The seal was burgundy wax, impressed with what appeared to be a family crest featuring 2 lions and a crown, though the details were too small for Catherine to discern clearly. "The visitor is Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne, a genealogical researcher from Cambridge University. She's presented credentials that appear authentic, and she's brought documentation that she claims concerns your mother's family line. Specifically, she mentions information about your maternal great-grandmother, whose records have apparently been discovered in recently opened archives." Catherine felt a peculiar sensation, as if the ornate room had suddenly tilted slightly on its axis. Her maternal great-grandmother, Victoria Ashworth, had died when Catherine's own mother was very young. Eleanor had always spoken of her grandmother with a mixture of love and mystery, explaining that many family records had been lost during the war years when bombing had destroyed the family home in Liverpool. The few photographs that survived showed an elegant woman with dark hair and intelligent eyes, but beyond basic biographical facts, little was known about Victoria Ashworth's life or background. Dr. Hawthorne claims that Victoria Ashworth may not have been who the family believed her to be. Margaret continued, her voice growing quieter with each word. "She's brought documents that suggest your great-grandmother may have had connections to European nobility, specifically to families that were displaced during the political upheavals of the early 20th century. The implications hit Catherine like cold water. If her great-grandmother had concealed noble heritage, it would mean that Catherine herself possessed bloodlines that had never been officially recognized or documented. In the complex world of royal marriages and succession laws, hidden noble heritage could complicate everything from inheritance rights to political alliances between nations. More personally, it would mean that her entire understanding of her family's identity had been built on incomplete information. Catherine moved to the window again, her mind racing through possibilities and consequences. Outside, the gardens continued their eternal cycle, roses blooming and fading according to seasons that cared nothing for human complications. Gardeners moved among the flower beds with steady purpose, their work unaffected by the dramas that played out within the palace walls. She envied them their simplicity, their ability to focus on tangible tasks with measurable results. "Where is Dr. Hawthorne now?" Catherine asked, turning back to Margaret. "She's waiting in the crimson sitting room, as per protocol for unscheduled visitors of potential significance. Security has verified her identity and credentials, and her documentation appears authentic. However, given the sensitive nature of her claims, King Alexander has requested that any meeting be conducted with full protocol and proper witnesses present." Catherine understood the subtext immediately. King Alexander, her father-in-law, was protecting both her and the institution of the monarchy by ensuring that any revelations would be properly documented and handled through official channels. If Dr. Hawthorne's information proved significant, it would need to be verified through multiple sources before any decisions could be made about how to proceed. If it proved false or exaggerated, there would be official witnesses to testify to its invalidity. The Crimson Sitting Room was one of the palace's formal receiving rooms, designed specifically for meetings with visitors whose status or purpose required dignity, but not intimacy. Its burgundy silk wallpapers and formal portraits of past monarchs created an atmosphere that was simultaneously welcoming and intimidating. Catherine had used the room countless times for meetings with charity representatives, minor dignitaries, and academics seeking royal patronage for their projects. "What does Prince William think about this situation?" Catherine asked, realizing she hadn't seen her husband since early morning when he had left for his own round of official engagements. Margaret's expression grew even more cautious. "His Royal Highness is currently meeting with the Foreign Secretary regarding next week's state visit preparations. He's been informed of the situation but felt that the initial meeting should proceed according to your judgment, given that the information concerns your family specifically." Catherine recognized William's diplomatic approach to family complications. After 15 years of marriage, she understood that he preferred to allow her to handle matters related to her own background while he focused on his constitutional duties. It was a practical division of responsibilities, but in moments like this, she would have appreciated his steadying presence and political instincts. A soft chiming from the ornate clock on the mantelpiece reminded Catherine that time was passing. The diplomatic reception would begin in 6 hours, and her schedule for the afternoon was packed with preparation activities, final wardrobe consultations, briefing sessions on the attending dignitaries, and rehearsal of the evening's protocol. Every minute spent addressing Dr. Hawthorne's unexpected revelations would need to be carved from other essential activities. Yet Catherine knew that some situations demanded immediate attention regardless of scheduling inconvenience. If Dr. Hawthorne possessed genuine information about family history, delaying the meeting could result in rumors spreading through unofficial channels or, worse, information being leaked to media outlets that would sensationalize and distort whatever truths might exist. "Please inform Dr. Hawthorne that I will meet with her in 30 minutes, Catherine decided. "And please ask Lord Pembroke to attend as witness, along with someone from the palace legal office." Lord Pembroke served as the palace's protocol secretary, a man whose understanding of royal procedures and constitutional law was encyclopedic. His presence would ensure that proper formalities were observed and that any information disclosed would be handled according to established protocols. The legal representative would advise on any implications that might affect official family records or succession documentation. Margaret nodded and made notes in her portfolio. "Shall I also inform His Majesty of the scheduled meeting?" "Yes, please keep the king informed, but emphasize that this is preliminary fact-finding only. I don't want to create unnecessary concern until we understand what Dr. Hawthorne actually possesses." After Margaret departed, Catherine remained alone in the blue drawing room, surrounded by centuries of royal history embedded in every piece of furniture, every painting, every decorative object. The room had witnessed countless family discussions, political decisions, and personal revelations throughout the generations. Previous princesses and queens had stood at these same windows, faced their own unexpected challenges, and made decisions that would affect not just their personal lives, but the stability of the crown itself. She thought about her mother, Eleanor, who had passed away 5 years earlier after a long battle with cancer. Eleanor had spoken occasionally about her mysterious grandmother Victoria, always with a wistful expression that suggested unanswered questions and stories that had died with previous generations. Catherine had sometimes pressed for more details, but Eleanor would simply smile and change the subject, as if protecting family secrets that were too fragile or too dangerous to examine closely. Now, it seemed, those secrets might finally be revealed. Catherine felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety as she prepared to meet Dr. Hawthorne. Part of her was genuinely curious about her family's hidden history, eager to fill in gaps that had always puzzled her. Another part worried about the complications that new information might create, especially given the delicate balance required to maintain royal dignity while acknowledging personal truths. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spirits of past inhabitants. Catherine took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and prepared to face whatever revelations Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne had brought to the gates of Rosehaven Palace. In 30 minutes, She would learn whether her family's carefully constructed history was about to be rewritten, and whether the tears that filled the palace in the days to come would be tears of joy or sorrow. Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne rose from the burgundy velvet chair as Catherine entered the crimson sitting room, her movements graceful despite carrying what appeared to be considerable weight in both physical documents and emotional burden. She was younger than Catherine had expected, perhaps 45, with prematurely silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, and intelligent gray eyes that seemed to assess everything with scholarly precision. Her dark blue suit was well-tailored, but conservative, the uniform of an academic who understood the importance of presenting herself seriously in formal settings. The room itself seemed to hold its breath as the formal introductions were completed. Lord Pembroke, distinguished in his morning dress, and bearing the quiet authority of 4 decades of royal service, positioned himself near the ornate writing desk where he could take detailed notes. Sarah Whitman from the Palace Legal Office sat discreetly to the side, her laptop open and fingers poised above the keyboard. The afternoon sunlight filtered through heavy crimson drapes, casting a warm but somehow ominous glow over the assembled group. "Your Royal Highness," Dr. Hawthorne began, her voice carrying the careful modulation of someone accustomed to presenting controversial research findings to skeptical audiences. "I want to begin by acknowledging that the information I'm about to share may be difficult to hear, and even more difficult to verify completely. However, my research has been conducted according to the highest academic standards, and I believe the evidence warrants serious consideration." Catherine settled into her chair, her hands folded carefully in her lap in the manner that 15 years of royal training had made automatic. She had learned to maintain perfect composure regardless of internal turbulence, though today she felt that skill being tested in unprecedented ways. The formal setting should have been comforting, surrounded as she was by advisors and protocol, but instead it emphasized the gravity of whatever revelations were about to unfold. Dr. Hawthorne opened a leather portfolio that had clearly seen considerable use in archives and libraries across Europe. The documents within were protected by acid-free folders and handled with the reverence due to historical artifacts. She withdrew what appeared to be a photograph, sepia-toned, and mounted on heavy cardboard backing in the style of early 20th century portraiture. This photograph was discovered 3 months ago in the private archives of the Benedictine Abbey of Sainte Marguerite in France, Dr. Hawthorne explained, passing the image to Catherine with careful reverence. The abbey was used as a refuge for displaced nobility during and after the First World War. Many aristocratic families sent daughters there for protection during periods of political instability. Catherine examined the photograph with growing astonishment. The woman pictured bore an unmistakable resemblance to the few images she possessed of her great-grandmother Victoria Ashworth. But this woman was dressed in the elaborate gowns and jewelry befitting European aristocracy. The backdrop suggested a formal portrait session in an elegant studio, not the modest circumstances that family history had always described for Victoria's early life. "The woman in this photograph," Dr. Hawthorne continued, "is identified in the Abbey's records as Lady Victoria Alexandrovna Romanova, daughter of Grand Duke Alexander of Russia and Princess Helena of Montenegro. She arrived at the Abbey in 1918, shortly after the Russian Revolution, carrying documents that established her noble birth but also included papers showing a legal name change to Victoria Ashworth." The words seemed to echo in the ornate room, each syllable carrying implications that Catherine was only beginning to comprehend. Russian nobility, Romanov connections, name changes to hide aristocratic heritage. The revelations challenged everything she had believed about her family's modest middle-class origins. Lord Pembroke leaned forward slightly, his experienced diplomat's instincts clearly engaged. "Dr. Hawthorne, you're claiming that Princess Catherine's great-grandmother was actually Russian nobility who fled the revolution and assumed a false identity?" "Not false, exactly," Dr. Hawthorne corrected, withdrawing additional documents from her portfolio. "The name change appears to have been legally accomplished through British immigration authorities, with the assistance of charitable organizations that were helping displaced Russian aristocrats establish new lives in England. Victoria Alexandrovna became Victoria Ashworth, but the transformation was documented and legitimate according to the laws of the time." Catherine stared at the photograph, seeing not just a resemblance to family features, but recognizing something in the woman's expression that reminded her of her own mother's occasional distant looks, as if Eleanor had inherited some genetic memory of grandeur lost. The implications were staggering not just personally, but politically. Russian noble blood, Romanov connections, hidden heritage. These revelations could complicate Catherine's position within the British royal family in ways she was only beginning to understand. Sarah Whitman spoke for the first time, her legal training evident in her precise questioning. What documentation exists to verify these claims? Court records, immigration documents, contemporary accounts. Dr. Hawthorne was clearly prepared for such scrutiny. She withdrew a series of documents, each carefully preserved and organized chronologically. The Abbey's records include correspondence between Victoria and various Russian émigré organizations in London. There are bank transfer records showing payments from Russian imperial relief funds. Most significantly, there's a letter from Victoria to the Mother Superior of the Abbey, written in 1922, in which she explicitly discusses her decision to permanently abandon her Russian identity to protect her future children from political complications. Catherine accepted the letter, noting immediately that the handwriting matched samples of her great-grandmother's script that her mother had preserved in family albums. The paper was expensive, the ink had faded to brown, and the language carried the formal cadences of educated aristocracy. As she read, her understanding of her family's history shifted fundamentally. "My dearest Mother Superior," the letter began, "I write to inform you of my decision to complete the transformation that began when I first sought refuge within your blessed walls. Victoria Alexandrovna died with the old Russia, and Victoria Ashworth must live completely in the New England. My children and their children must never bear the burden of our family's tragic past, nor should they be endangered by connections to political movements that seek to restore what can never be restored. I go to Liverpool to build a life that honors God and serves the humble community that has welcomed me, carrying only love and prayers from my previous existence." Catherine felt tears forming despite her royal training in emotional control. The letter revealed not just hidden noble heritage, but the profound sacrifice her great-grandmother had made to ensure her descendants could live safely in their adopted country. Victoria had deliberately erased her own aristocratic identity to protect future generations from the political complications that haunted Russian émigrés throughout the early 20th century. Dr. Hawthorne continued her presentation with academic thoroughness. Contemporary records show that many Russian nobles who fled to Britain faced ongoing scrutiny from both Soviet agents seeking to eliminate aristocratic survivors and from British intelligence services suspicious of Russian political connections. Victoria's decision to completely abandon her noble identity was actually quite common among Russian refugees who wanted to build stable lives for their families. Lord Pembroke had been taking detailed notes throughout the presentation, his diplomatic experience evident in the precise questions he posed. "Dr. Hawthorne, what motivated your research into Princess Catherine's family background? This seems like quite specialized genealogical work to have been undertaken without specific commission." The academic's expression became slightly uncomfortable, and Catherine sensed that the answer to this question might be significant. "My research actually began 18 months ago when I was commissioned by a private client to investigate Russian noble families who had successfully integrated into British society. The client was particularly interested in descendants who had achieved prominent social positions." Catherine felt a chill of apprehension. "Who was this private client, Dr. Hawthorne?" "I'm bound by confidentiality agreements regarding the client's identity," Dr. Hawthorne replied carefully. "However, I can tell you that once my research uncovered Princess Catherine's connection to the Romanov family line, I felt morally obligated to bring this information directly to the royal family rather than simply providing it to my client. Some discoveries transcend commercial research agreements." The implications were deeply troubling. Someone had paid for genealogical research specifically targeting Russian nobles who had achieved social prominence in Britain, and Catherine's family had been identified through this investigation. The timing was particularly concerning given current political tensions between Britain and Russia and the ongoing international complications surrounding Russian oligarchs and political refugees seeking asylum in Western countries. Sarah Whitman was clearly thinking along similar lines. "Dr. Hawthorne, did your research client express any particular interest in how this information might be used? Were you asked to provide documentation that could be used for political purposes or media disclosure?" "The original research commission was quite general," Dr. Hawthorne replied, though her discomfort was increasingly evident. "However, after I declined to provide my findings about Princess Catherine's family, the client became quite insistent and offered substantial additional payment for complete documentation. That's when I decided to approach the palace directly rather than fulfill the original contract. Catherine exchanged glances with Lord Pembroke, both recognizing the serious security implications. Someone with significant financial resources was actively seeking information that could be used to embarrass or politically compromise the royal family. The discovery of hidden Russian noble heritage could be weaponized in numerous ways, from media sensationalism to international political pressure. Dr. Hawthorne, Catherine said carefully, I appreciate your decision to bring this information to us directly rather than to your client. However, I need to understand the scope of documentation you've gathered and whether copies exist elsewhere. The academic opened her portfolio wider, revealing the extent of her research. I've compiled approximately 200 pages of documentation spanning from 1918 to 1925, tracing Victoria's transformation from Russian nobility to English commoner. Bank records, correspondence, immigration documents, church records from Liverpool, even employment records from the textile mill where she met your great-grandfather. The research is comprehensive enough to definitively establish the connection. Lord Pembroke leaned back in his chair, clearly calculating political implications. Dr. Hawthorne, in your professional opinion, could this documentation be used to challenge Princess Catherine's legitimacy within the royal family structure? Absolutely not, Dr. Hawthorne replied firmly. If anything, the discovery of additional noble bloodlines would traditionally strengthen royal legitimacy rather than weaken it. However, the revelation of hidden family history could certainly be exploited for sensational purposes or used to suggest that the royal family has incomplete knowledge of its own connections. Catherine was beginning to understand the full complexity of her situation. The information itself was fascinating and, in many ways, positive. Discovering that her family possessed more distinguished heritage than previously known should have been cause for celebration. However, the circumstances of the discovery, the unknown client's motives, and the current political climate transformed these revelations into potential weapons against both her personal reputation and the institutional stability of the monarchy. I need some time to process this information and consult with appropriate advisors, Catherine said finally. Dr. Hawthorne, would you be willing to remain at the palace as our guest while we determine how to proceed? I want to ensure that you're protected and that your research materials remain secure. Dr. Hawthorne nodded gratefully. I had hoped you would want time for verification and consultation. I've brought all my original research materials, and I'm prepared to cooperate fully with any additional investigation your security services might require. As the formal meeting concluded, Catherine felt the weight of new knowledge settling around her like an elaborate but heavy crown. Her understanding of her family's identity had been fundamentally altered in the space of an hour, and the political implications of these revelations would require careful navigation in the days ahead. Outside, the afternoon continued its stately progression toward the evening's diplomatic reception, but Catherine knew that she would attend that event as a different person than she had been that morning. Walking back through the palace corridors, past portraits of royal ancestors whose own family complications had shaped centuries of British history, Catherine reflected on the irony that her family's attempt to escape political drama by hiding noble heritage had ultimately created new political complications. The tears that would fill the palace in the days to come seemed inevitable now, though whether they would be tears of joy for discovered heritage or sorrow for lost innocence remained to be determined. King Alexander stood at the windows of his private study, his tall frame silhouetted against the gathering dusk as shadows lengthened across the palace grounds. At 71, he carried himself with the dignity that 50 years of royal duty had instilled, though today the weight of the crown seemed heavier than usual. The study had been his sanctuary since ascending to the throne 31 years ago, a room where he could set aside public persona and grapple with the complex decisions that shaped not just his family, but the constitutional monarchy itself. The diplomatic reception had concluded an hour earlier, a glittering success by all external measures. Foreign ambassadors had praised the elegance of the evening, trade agreements had been quietly advanced through informal conversations, and the photographs released to the media showed the royal family at their most gracious and united. Catherine had performed magnificently despite the emotional turmoil she must have been experiencing, her smile radiant and her conversations animated throughout the evening. Only someone who knew her intimately would have noticed the slight tension around her eyes, or the way she occasionally paused mid-sentence, as if her thoughts were elsewhere. Prince William had handled his own duties with characteristic competence, though Alexander had observed his son engaging in more serious conversations than usual with various ambassadors, as if seeking counsel or testing opinions on matters beyond the evening's official agenda. The younger generation of royals had learned to read political undercurrents with sophistication that both impressed and concerned their patriarch, who remembered when royal duties were more ceremonial and less fraught with potential constitutional crises. A soft knock interrupted Alexander's contemplation. His private secretary, Sir James Morrison, entered with the careful demeanor that indicated sensitive business requiring discreet discussion. At 58, Sir James had served the crown for over 2 decades, his loyalty absolute, and his discretion legendary throughout Westminster and Whitehall circles. "Your Majesty," Sir James began, settling into the chair across from Alexander's desk with practiced efficiency. "I've received the preliminary report from our security services regarding Dr. Hawthorne's research and the anonymous client who commissioned her investigation." Alexander turned from the window, his expression grave. The implications of Catherine's genealogical revelations had been weighing on his mind throughout the evening's festivities, made more troubling by the mysterious circumstances surrounding their discovery. In his 3 decades as monarch, he had learned to recognize threats to institutional stability, and this situation contained elements that could prove far more dangerous than simple family history complications. "What have they discovered?" Alexander asked, settling behind his desk were the formal trappings of monarchy: the gold-embossed leather blotter, the crystal inkwells, the ceremonial seal of office, provided familiar comfort in uncertain times. Sir James consulted his notes, though Alexander suspected he had memorized every detail of the sensitive report. "The security services have identified the client who commissioned Dr. Hawthorne's research as Dmitry Volkov, a Russian oligarch currently residing in Switzerland. Volkov has significant business interests that have been affected by recent sanctions against Russian nationals, and intelligence suggests he's been seeking information that could be used to pressure Western governments regarding their Russian policies." The revelation struck Alexander like a physical blow. Dmitry Volkov was known throughout intelligence circles as a man who used information as currency, trading secrets, and compromising material to advance his financial and political objectives. If Volkov possessed documentation of Catherine's Russian noble heritage, he would undoubtedly attempt to use it for leverage in his ongoing disputes with British authorities regarding frozen assets and business sanctions. "How extensive is Volkov's knowledge of Catherine's family background?" Alexander asked, though he dreaded the answer. According to Dr. Hawthorne's debriefing, she provided Volkov with preliminary research indicating potential Russian connections, but withheld the specific documentation once she realized the political implications. However, Volkov's own resources are considerable, and our analysts believe he may have access to additional archives that could corroborate or expand upon Dr. Hawthorne's findings. Alexander rose and moved to the ornate fireplace where portraits of previous monarchs seemed to observe his deliberations with centuries of accumulated wisdom. King George VI gazed down with particular intensity, reminding Alexander of another royal crisis when hidden family connections had threatened constitutional stability. The parallels were unsettling. Unexpected revelations about royal bloodlines, foreign political interference, and the potential for personal family matters to become international incidents. "What are our options for containing this situation?" Alexander asked, though his experience suggested that information once discovered rarely remained hidden indefinitely. Sir James shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware that his recommendations would involve difficult choices with no entirely satisfactory outcomes. The legal advisors suggest 3 possible approaches. First, we could proactively release the information about Princess Catherine's heritage through official channels, controlling the narrative and emphasizing the positive aspects of discovering additional noble lineage. Second, we could work with our diplomatic corps to neutralize Volkov's potential leverage by addressing his sanctions grievances through separate negotiations. Third, we could implement complete information suppression, using national security provisions to classify Dr. Hawthorne's research and prevent any public disclosure. Each option carried significant risks and potential consequences that Alexander understood all too well. Proactive disclosure would generate massive media attention and potentially weeks of genealogical speculation that could overshadow important state business. Negotiating with Volkov would establish dangerous precedent for allowing foreign nationals to influence British policy through threats to the royal family. Complete suppression would work only until Volkov decided to release whatever information he possessed through alternative channels, likely with much more damaging presentation than official disclosure would provide. Has Prince William been briefed on these developments? Alexander asked. His Royal Highness received a preliminary briefing during his security consultation this afternoon. He's requested a full family meeting tomorrow morning to discuss response strategies with both Your Majesty and Princess Catherine present. Alexander appreciated his son's approach to crisis management, understanding that family unity was essential when facing external threats to royal stability. William had learned hard lessons about media manipulation and political exploitation during his younger years, and his instincts for protecting both institution and family had been honed through numerous challenges over the past decade and a half. The king moved to his private safe, retrieving a leather-bound journal that contained his personal observations and concerns regarding threats to constitutional monarchy. The journal had been begun during his first year on the throne, following advice from his own father about the importance of documenting decisions and reasoning during times of crisis. Future historians would eventually examine these records to understand how the monarchy navigated the complex challenges of the modern era. Sir James, Alexander said as he made careful notes about the current situation, I want you to arrange discreet consultations with our constitutional law experts regarding the implications of newly discovered royal bloodlines. Specifically, I need to understand whether Catherine's Russian heritage creates any legal complications regarding succession laws or international treaties. The request reflected Alexander's systematic approach to royal crises, ensuring that every possible angle was examined before major decisions were made. Constitutional law regarding royal marriages and bloodlines had evolved significantly over recent decades, but unexpected heritage discoveries could still trigger review of various legal protocols and international agreements that govern royal relationships with foreign nations. There's one additional concern, Your Majesty, Sir James said carefully. Intelligence services have detected increased interest from several international media organizations in Russian noble families who integrated into Western society after the revolution. This appears to be part of a broader investigation into Cold War-era refugees and their descendants, potentially triggered by Volkov's research activities. The implications were deeply troubling. If multiple media outlets were investigating Russian émigré families, Catherine's heritage would likely be discovered independently even if Volkov's specific threat were neutralized. The royal family would be facing not just one potential disclosure, but potentially multiple competing narratives about hidden family history, each shaped by different political agendas and editorial perspectives. Alexander closed his journal and returned it to the safe, his mind already calculating the complex chess game that lay ahead. Protecting Catherine and preserving institutional stability would require careful coordination between palace security, government intelligence services, and international diplomatic channels. Every decision would need to consider not just immediate consequences, but long-term implications for royal authority and public confidence. Schedule the family meeting for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning in the Oak Conference Room, Alexander instructed. I want complete privacy and security sweeps beforehand. Also, please arrange for discreet consultation with the Archbishop regarding any theological implications of newly discovered noble heritage from Russian Orthodox traditions. The religious angle was another complication Alexander had identified, though one that might ultimately prove advantageous. The Anglican Church had complex historical relationships with Russian Orthodox tradition, and Catherine's heritage could potentially strengthen interfaith dialogue initiatives that the monarchy had been carefully developing to improve relationships with Eastern European Orthodox communities. As Sir James departed to implement these directives, Alexander remained alone in his study, surrounded by the accumulated weight of royal history and responsibility. Through the windows, palace security lights illuminated the gardens where Catherine had walked that morning, unaware that her entire understanding of her identity was about to be transformed. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations and complex decisions, but tonight offered only the heavy silence of a king contemplating choices that would affect not just his beloved daughter-in-law, but the future stability of the crown itself. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 11 times, its resonant tones echoing through chambers that had witnessed centuries of royal deliberations during times of crisis and triumph. Alexander picked up a silver-framed photograph of Catherine and William from their wedding day 15 years earlier, remembering the joy and hope that had filled the cathedral as the young couple pledged their lives to each other and to the service of the realm. That innocent happiness seemed very far away tonight, replaced by the stark realities of modern monarchy, where personal family matters could become international political incidents with consequences that rippled far beyond palace walls. Alexander set down the photograph and prepared for bed, knowing that tomorrow would require all his accumulated wisdom and diplomatic skill to protect both the institution he served and the family he loved. The king's silence would end tomorrow, but tonight it served as both shield and burden as he contemplated the challenges that dawn would bring. The Oak Conference Room had witnessed countless moments of royal decision-making throughout its 3-century history, but rarely had the ancient paneled walls contained such personal anguish mingled with political urgency. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall Gothic windows, illuminating the polished oak table where Catherine sat between Prince William and King Alexander, her hands folded carefully in her lap to hide their trembling. The room's formal grandeur seemed almost oppressive today, its portraits of past monarchs serving as silent witnesses to another family crisis that would test the bonds holding the monarchy together. Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne sat at the far end of the table, her academic composure intact despite the obvious weight of the revelations she had brought to the palace. Her research materials were spread before her in careful order, each document a piece of the puzzle that was reshaping Catherine's understanding of her own identity. The morning light caught the edges of yellowed photographs and aged letters, transforming family history into something that felt both intimate and monumentally significant. Prince William had arrived early, his usual warm demeanor replaced by the focused intensity he displayed during constitutional crises. At 43, he possessed his father's diplomatic instincts combined with a younger generation's understanding of media dynamics and international politics. His questions to Dr. Hawthorne had been thorough and occasionally sharp, demonstrating both protective concern for his wife and analytical assessment of potential threats to royal stability. Dr. Hawthorne, William said, consulting notes he had prepared during his security briefings, "I want to understand the timeline of your research more clearly. When exactly did Dmitry Volkov first contact you? And what specific instructions did he provide regarding Russian noble families in Britain?" The academic shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware that her answers would help determine how the royal family chose to handle the explosive information she had uncovered. "Mr. Volkov's representative first approached me in March of last year. The initial commission seemed routine, genealogical research into Russian émigré communities who had successfully integrated into British society during the interwar period. He was particularly interested in families who had achieved prominence in business, academia, or social circles." Catherine felt a chill as the implications became clearer. Volkov had been systematically investigating Russian families who had built successful lives in Britain, potentially seeking information that could be used for various forms of leverage or blackmail. Her family had been targeted not because of any specific suspicion about their heritage, but as part of a broader intelligence-gathering operation designed to identify vulnerable points within British society. King Alexander leaned forward, his expression grave. Did Volkov or his representatives provide any indication of how they intended to use this genealogical information? Were there suggestions that it might be employed for political or financial purposes? The contract was quite vague about end usage, Dr. Hawthorne admitted. However, as my research progressed and I began uncovering significant findings, Volkov's interest became much more intense. He offered substantial bonuses for expedited completion and began asking specific questions about potential royal connections or high-profile family links. William and Catherine exchanged glances, both recognizing the pattern of someone fishing for information that could be weaponized against prominent British families. The discovery of Catherine's Russian noble heritage represented exactly the kind of compromising material that a man like Volkov could exploit in numerous ways, from direct blackmail to media manipulation designed to embarrass the royal family during sensitive political negotiations. "Catherine," William said gently, turning to his wife with the protective concern that had characterized their marriage through 15 years of public scrutiny and private challenges, "I want you to know that whatever we discover about your family's background, it doesn't change anything fundamental about who you are or your place in our family." The words, meant to comfort, instead triggered the emotional dam that Catherine had been carefully maintaining since yesterday's revelations. Tears began flowing freely as the weight of hidden family history, political manipulation, and potential threats to everything she held dear finally overwhelmed her practiced royal composure. The woman who had gracefully hosted foreign dignitaries just hours earlier was suddenly, devastatingly human in her vulnerability and confusion. "I keep thinking about my mother," Catherine said through her tears, accepting the handkerchief that King Alexander offered with grandfatherly tenderness. She must have known something. Those moments when she would get that distant look while talking about her grandmother, the way she would change the subject whenever I asked too many questions about family history. She was protecting me from something she knew would be complicated. William moved his chair closer to his wife's, offering physical support that transcended royal protocol. In this moment, he was not the future king, but simply a husband watching his beloved wife grapple with revelations that challenged her fundamental sense of identity. The formal setting melted away as human emotion overwhelmed institutional considerations. King Alexander watched his daughter-in-law's distress with paternal concern that had deepened over their 15 years of relationship. Catherine had always been more than just William's wife to him. She had become the daughter he had never had, bringing warmth and authenticity to a family that sometimes struggled to balance personal relationships with constitutional duties. Seeing her pain now awakened protective instincts that had nothing to do with royal protocol and everything to do with family love. "Catherine, my dear," Alexander said softly, "your mother's protection of these family secrets demonstrates wisdom, not deception." She understood that some truths are dangerous not because they're shameful, but because they can be misused by others with harmful intentions. Dr. Hawthorne cleared her throat delicately, clearly uncomfortable intruding on such intimate family moments, but aware that her professional insights were essential to understanding the situation fully. "If I may, Your Majesty, the letters I discovered suggest that Victoria Alexandrovna made her choices very deliberately. She wasn't simply hiding her noble heritage. She was protecting her descendants from political complications that could have affected their entire lives." The academic retrieved one of the letters from her carefully organized collection, handling it with the reverence due to historical documents that revealed profound human decisions. This letter, written to a fellow Russian refugee in 1924, discusses her concerns about Soviet agents tracking aristocratic survivors and British suspicions about Russian political affiliations. She explicitly states that her transformation into Victoria Ashworth was meant to give her children and grandchildren the freedom to build purely British identities. Catherine accepted the letter with trembling hands, recognizing again her great-grandmother's elegant script, but seeing it now through the lens of sacrifice rather than simple immigration. The words revealed a young woman making impossibly difficult choices to ensure that future generations could live without the burden of political persecution or cultural suspicion that haunted Russian émigrés throughout the early 20th century. "Listen to this," Catherine said, reading aloud from the faded pages. "I dream sometimes that my granddaughters will dance at English balls, marry English gentlemen, and never know the terror of midnight knocks at doors or the grief of watching empires crumble. If my sacrifice of identity can purchase their innocent happiness, then Victoria Alexandrovna will have died for the most worthy cause imaginable." The poignant words hung in the morning air, transforming the family crisis from political complications to human story of love transcending generations. Victoria's sacrifice had indeed purchased the innocent happiness she had envisioned. Catherine had danced at English balls, married an English prince, and lived without fear of political persecution. The irony was devastating. The very heritage that Victoria had hidden to protect her descendants was now being weaponized to threaten that safety. William stood and moved to the windows, his hands clasped behind his back in unconscious imitation of his father's contemplative posture. "The question we face now is whether we can honor Victoria's protective intentions while dealing with the reality that her secrets have been discovered by people with hostile intentions." King Alexander had been considering this exact dilemma throughout the sleepless night, weighing various response strategies against their potential consequences for both family and institution. "I've been consulting with constitutional experts and intelligence advisors," he said carefully. "There are several approaches we might consider, each with different implications for the family and the crown." "What kind of approaches?" Catherine asked, wiping her tears and attempting to regain the composure that royal life demanded even during personal crises. "We could choose complete transparency," Alexander explained. "Publicly releasing the information about your heritage before Volkov can use it against us. This would eliminate his leverage, but would also generate enormous media attention and potentially weeks of genealogical speculation about royal bloodlines and their implications. William turned back to the table, his expression troubled. That approach treats Catherine's personal family history as a political commodity rather than respecting her privacy and the protective choices her great-grandmother made. Alternatively, Alexander continued, we could attempt to neutralize Volkov through diplomatic channels, addressing his sanctions grievances in exchange for his agreement to suppress the genealogical information. However, this sets dangerous precedent for allowing foreign nationals to influence British policy through threats against the royal family. Catherine felt the weight of impossible choices settling around her like a heavy cloak. Every option seemed to require sacrificing either her personal privacy, her family's protective legacy, or the institutional principles that governed royal conduct. The tears that had stopped began flowing again as she confronted the realization that her great-grandmother's carefully constructed protection was crumbling under pressures that Victoria could never have anticipated. There's a third option, Dr. Hawthorne said quietly, her academic perspective offering insights that purely political analysis might miss. We could choose selective disclosure, revealing the information to trusted historians and genealogists who could authenticate it properly while maintaining strict confidentiality until the family decides how to proceed. William considered this possibility with visible relief. That would give us time to process the information personally while ensuring that proper verification occurs before any public disclosure. King Alexander nodded thoughtfully. It would also allow us to prepare comprehensive responses to likely questions and criticisms, ensuring that when the information eventually becomes public, as it inevitably will, we're ready with complete context rather than defensive reactions. As the morning conference continued, Catherine found herself drawing strength from the family solidarity that had always sustained the monarchy through its various crises. William's protective presence, Alexander's paternal wisdom, and even Dr. Hawthorne's respectful professionalism created a supportive environment where impossible decisions might become merely difficult ones. The tears that filled the palace that morning were tears of grief for lost innocence, fear of uncertain future, but also love that transcended political complications and institutional pressures. In the end, Catherine realized her great-grandmother's most precious legacy wasn't the noble heritage she had hidden but the family bonds she had made possible through her sacrifice. Those bonds would have to be strong enough to carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead, just as Victoria Alexandrovna had hoped when she chose love over lineage nearly a century before. 3 weeks had passed since Dr. Hawthorne's revelations had transformed Catherine's understanding of her family's history, and the autumn air at Rosehaven Palace carried the promise of winter's approach. The crisis that had threatened to destabilize both personal relationships and institutional security had been navigated with careful diplomacy and family solidarity, though not without profound changes that would resonate through future generations of the royal family. Catherine stood once again at the windows of the blue drawing room, but this time her contemplation was colored by knowledge rather than ignorance, by acceptance rather than confusion. The genealogical verification process had been completed by 3 independent historical research institutions, all confirming Dr. Hawthorne's findings about Victoria Alexandrovna Romanova's transformation into Victoria Ashworth. More importantly, additional documentation had been discovered that painted a complete picture of her great-grandmother's courage, sacrifice, and unwavering determination to protect her descendants from the political upheavals that had destroyed her own world. The resolution had come through King Alexander's characteristic combination of diplomatic skill and moral clarity. Rather than succumbing to Dmitry Volkov's attempts at leverage, the royal family had chosen to honor Victoria's protective intentions by maintaining control over how her story would be told. Volkov's sanctions grievances had been addressed through entirely separate diplomatic channels, making clear that royal family privacy was not a commodity available for political bargaining. Dr. Hawthorne had become an unexpected ally in this process, her academic integrity proving more valuable than any political calculation. She had agreed to serve as the official historian for Victoria's story, ensuring that when the information eventually became public, it would be presented with appropriate context and respect for the human complexities involved. Her research had expanded beyond simple genealogy to become a comprehensive study of Russian émigré communities and their contributions to British society throughout the 20th century. Prince William entered the drawing room carrying a leather portfolio that Catherine recognized as containing the final legal documents establishing a new charitable foundation dedicated to supporting refugees and displaced persons seeking to build new lives in Britain. The Victoria Alexandrovna Foundation would serve multiple purposes, honoring Catherine's great-grandmother's memory, providing practical assistance to modern refugees facing similar challenges, and creating a positive framework for discussing the royal family's connection to immigrant communities. "The foundation papers are ready for your signature," William said, settling beside his wife on the blue silk sofa that had become their informal meeting place during the intense weeks of decision-making and planning. "The Archbishop has agreed to conduct the dedication ceremony next month, and we've received enthusiastic support from refugee advocacy organizations throughout the Commonwealth." Catherine accepted the documents with hands that no longer trembled when confronting her family's hidden history. The foundation represented more than charitable activity. It was a declaration that Victoria's sacrifice would be transformed into ongoing service to others facing similar challenges. Rather than hiding from the complexities of immigrant heritage, the royal family would embrace and celebrate the contributions that displaced persons had made to British society. "Have we heard anything further from Volkov's representatives?" Catherine asked, though she suspected the answer would be negative. "Radio silence since the diplomatic resolution," William confirmed. "Our intelligence sources suggest he's moved on to other projects now that this particular leverage has been neutralized. More importantly, the information verification process has created such comprehensive documentation that any future attempts to manipulate these facts would be immediately recognizable as distortion or fabrication." The strategic wisdom behind this approach had become apparent as the weeks progressed. By controlling the narrative through careful disclosure to trusted historians and legal documentation through the foundation, the royal family had transformed potential vulnerability into institutional strength. Catherine's Russian noble heritage was now a matter of verified historical record rather than dangerous secret, available for scholarly study but protected from sensationalism or political manipulation. King Alexander joined them in the drawing room, his presence carrying the satisfaction of a diplomat who had successfully navigated treacherous waters without compromising essential principles. At 71, he had seen the monarchy adapt to numerous challenges throughout his reign, but this particular crisis had tested his ability to balance institutional protection with personal family loyalty in unprecedented ways. "The Prime Minister sends his compliments on how this situation has been handled," Alexander said, settling into his favorite armchair with the graceful economy of movement that characterized his approach to royal duties. "He's particularly pleased that we managed to address the security concerns without creating precedent for foreign interference in royal family matters." The political implications had indeed been significant, extending far beyond simple genealogical discoveries. The successful resolution had strengthened Britain's position in ongoing negotiations with various Russian interests, while demonstrating that the royal family could not be intimidated or manipulated by external pressure. Other foreign nationals with questionable agendas had received a clear message about the futility of attempting to use royal family privacy as political leverage. Catherine rose and moved to her writing desk, where the morning's correspondence included letters from historians around the world requesting access to the Victoria Alexandrovna archives for legitimate scholarly research. The transformation from family secret to historical resource had occurred with remarkable speed, suggesting that Victoria's story had captured international interest as an example of successful cultural integration during politically turbulent times. Dr. Hawthorne believes that Victoria's story could become an important case study in refugee adaptation and cultural preservation, Catherine said, scanning the academic correspondence with growing appreciation for the scholarly interest her great-grandmother's life had generated. Several universities want to include her experience in courses about 20th-century European history and immigration studies. The educational potential had been another unexpected benefit of the careful disclosure process. Rather than being simply a royal family curiosity, Victoria's transformation from Russian aristocrat to English commoner was being recognized as historically significant in its own right, offering insights into the experiences of thousands of displaced persons who had rebuilt their lives in new countries during the interwar period. William moved to Catherine's desk and examined the scholarly correspondence with the interest he had always shown in educational initiatives. This could be extraordinary for the Foundation's mission. If Victoria's story helps people understand the challenges and contributions of refugee communities, it advances exactly the kind of social awareness that the monarchy should be promoting. The irony was not lost on any of them that Victoria's attempt to hide her heritage for protective purposes had ultimately created opportunities to celebrate and support the immigrant communities she had sought to blend into seamlessly. Her sacrifice had protected her descendants from political persecution, but their decision to honor her memory openly was now creating benefits for contemporary refugees facing similar challenges to those she had overcome. A soft knock announced the arrival of Margaret Thornfield with the afternoon schedule and a special delivery that had arrived from the Benedictine Abbey of Sainte Marguerite in France. The Mother Superior had sent additional letters from Victoria to the Abbey, discovered during recent archive reorganization, along with photographs of the young Russian refugee who would become Catherine's great-grandmother. Catherine opened the package with reverent care, discovering images of Victoria during her transition period when she was learning English customs and preparing for her new life in Liverpool. The photographs revealed a young woman of extraordinary dignity and determination, her aristocratic bearing gradually softening into the more modest demeanor that would characterize her English identity. Most moving were the final photographs, showing Victoria in simple English dress but wearing a small pendant that was clearly of Russian origin, a private symbol of heritage she would carry but never publicly acknowledge. She kept something, Catherine murmured, examining the pendant through a magnifying glass. She didn't abandon everything from her previous life. The discovery was deeply meaningful, suggesting that Victoria's transformation had been strategic rather than complete, maintaining private connection to her heritage while publicly embracing her new identity. The pendant appeared to be a small Orthodox cross, beautifully crafted but deliberately modest, exactly the kind of personal memorial that could be worn without attracting attention or questions about its significance. Dr. Hawthorne, who had remained at the palace as a consultant during the verification process, examined the photographs with professional excitement. This changes our understanding of Victoria's adaptation process significantly. She wasn't rejecting her Russian identity entirely, but rather creating a private space for cultural continuity within her public English persona. The distinction was important for the Foundation's educational mission, demonstrating that successful integration didn't require complete abandonment of heritage, but rather careful balance between private identity and public adaptation. Victoria's example could provide guidance for contemporary refugees struggling with similar questions about cultural preservation and social integration. As afternoon faded into evening, the royal family gathered in the blue drawing room for tea, a tradition that had sustained them through countless challenges over the decades. Today's gathering felt different, however, marked by resolution rather than crisis, by celebration of heritage rather than fear of disclosure. Catherine poured tea from the silver service that had belonged to Queen Isabella, connecting her current happiness to centuries of royal women who had faced their own challenges with dignity and determination. "I've been thinking about what Victoria would say if she could see how this has developed," Catherine said, passing cups to her family with the graceful efficiency that 15 years of royal training had made automatic. "I think she would be proud that her sacrifice created opportunities to help others rather than simply protecting her own descendants." King Alexander accepted his tea with the satisfied expression of a monarch who had successfully protected both institution and family during a significant crisis. She would certainly be amazed that her great-great-granddaughter was having tea with kings and planning charitable foundations rather than hiding from political persecution. William raised his teacup in a spontaneous toast to Victoria Alexandrovna Romanova Ashworth, who understood that love sometimes requires sacrifice, but that sacrifice can ultimately create unexpected opportunities for service. As they drank to Victoria's memory, Catherine felt the profound sense of completion that comes when family mysteries are finally resolved and inherited burdens transformed into inherited blessings. The tears that had filled the palace during those difficult weeks of revelation and decision-making had been tears of grief for lost innocence, but they had also been tears of relief for discovered truth and tears of joy for family bonds that proved stronger than any external pressure. Outside the tall windows, the palace gardens continued their eternal cycle of growth and renewal, roses giving way to winter's dormancy, but carrying within them the promise of spring's return. Catherine understood now that family history, like the gardens, involved cycles of concealment and revelation, sacrifice and reward, endings that became beginnings in ways that could never be fully anticipated. The Victoria Alexandrovna Foundation would be officially launched in 6 weeks, with a ceremony that would honor both the past and the future, both the Russian aristocrat who had sacrificed her identity for love and the contemporary refugees who would benefit from that sacrifice transformed into service. King Alexander's silence during those crucial days had protected the family while they found their way forward. But now that silence had given way to stories worth telling, heritage worth celebrating, and love worth sharing with others facing similar challenges. As night settled over Rosehaven Palace, Catherine prepared for bed knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but secure in the knowledge that family bonds had proven stronger than external threats, that hidden heritage had become public blessing, and that Victoria Alexandrovna's courage lived on in her descendants' determination to transform personal discovery into service to others. The tears were finished now, replaced by hope and purpose that would guide the royal family into whatever future awaited them.